All right, Brian, we're good and fired up now, man. And as if I couldn't get any more fired up for this game, I am somehow. And it's probably going to continue to build as the week goes on until we get to January 20th, right? And so we're going to start out this segment by talking about the reasons why we believe Notre Dame is going to win this football game. And there was a lot of overlap, to the surprise probably of nobody, but there's a lot of things that you and I see eye to eye, and the things that we had listed out differently, we all both agree with regardless, right? So the first one that we had written down, yeah.
Before we dive into the specific five, I did want to kind of address a couple things first and talk about what makes this situation different. And this is going to be somewhat relative to what we just discussed in the previous section, not in response to what was said, but about what makes this team different. Because this team, in my opinion, is different. And I've been asked this on a couple shows, Trevor, and I think this needs to be said. And the one thing that's different about this team, and I did an interview with Bryce Cone, excuse me, I believe is Bryce's name. I hope I'm not getting his last name wrong. Now I'm gonna look that up. He's a guy that covers Bryce Coon. He covers Georgia Tech and LSU. He's had me on a couple times. Really nice guy. And he asked me. He was asked. I can't remember specific of the question because I've been asked a lot of questions this week. But he was talking about what's different, basically. And I was like, the reason that I look at this team and the situation is different because this Notre Dame team is different. This is not a Notre Dame team that in this stage needs everything to go right to win this game. And that was what was behind the question that bothered me so much. It's not even that if he would have just asked, hey, you've caught some breaks this year, I'd say that's a faulty opinion, but I wouldn't have had the reaction that I did. It's when it got to be the disrespectful nature of the way he phrased it. But I could say, all right, I get it. You're still kind of a little bit living in the past. And honestly, in a lot of ways, Trevor, Notre Dame still has to prove that they are not that team anymore by winning a game like this. Look, I said I think it was our show yesterday, maybe a different one yesterday. Look, if Notre Dame goes out there and loses this game by a field goal or a touchdown in a game, it's just a hard-fought four-quarter game. That they show like, hey, we're not there yet, but we're legit. Ohio State's just better than us right now. We got to figure out how we can get better so we can meet them next time. If they go out and get beat convincingly, then you say, well, a lot of that good vibes and that mojo you had is going to be gone from a narrative standpoint. It doesn't erase that you smacked Georgia. It doesn't erase that you beat Penn State. But the narrative still lives and breathes. It's on life support, but it's still there. But what gives me a different feeling about this game is as I break down the film, I don't have to watch the film and convince myself, as some Ohio State fans have said in our chat, that if A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down to Z goes exactly right, that Notre Dame might win this game with a walk-off field goal. You know what I mean? If they can, have a couple balls bounce off Ohio State, they catch for 50-yard touchdowns. If they can force 19 turnovers, if they, you know what I mean? And then maybe they have a chance to win this football game. This is the first time, Trevor, where I've this is the first time, meaning this season, where I look at Notre Dame playing at Texas A&M, playing against Georgia, playing against Penn State, and saying, they're better. They just got to play like it. Now, this is the first game where I feel it's more like this, so you've got to play your game in some ways, but it's still not about you got to catch some breaks. It's just you got to play your game. You can't afford to get away with some of the things you got away with against Georgia because you're not better than Ohio State in the ways that you were better than Georgia or Indiana or even Penn State to a degree. So it comes down to you've got to play your game. And a lot of these things we're going to talk about are going to be about what makes this Notre Dame team capable of playing their game. In 2020 against Bama, you need to play your game to the best of its ability in every phase. And then maybe if you can catch a couple breaks, you might be able to pull off a big upset win. Same thing against Clemson. Clemson 2018 was more evenly matched, but you needed some things to go right in that game as well. They almost did. If it wasn't for some bad officiating overturns, I still say there's no reason to overturn that fumble. That would have given Notre Dame the ball inside the 15-yard line against Clemson, the fumble kick. But the point is that these are two outstanding football teams, and Notre Dame doesn't have to take a back seat and people will focus on Ohio State's talent and all that. And there, it's all true. Like, there's not one thing I've disagreed with about what I've heard about Ohio State. They're really talented at receiver. Best receiving core in the country. All right, cool. One of the best running back rooms in the country, arguably the best. Okay, I don't think it's the best, but as we've said all year, I think it's third. You know what I mean? Behind Notre Dame and Penn State, they're all really, really good. You know, hey, great, very experienced lockdown defense. All right, facts. 2 excellent coordinators. Agree. We're on the same page. The issue is that I think that people aren't giving Notre Dame its proper respect and acknowledgement for how good they are. That's where my beef comes from. It's not, this isn't a very good Ohio State team. This isn't that. Let me tear down Ohio State. I don't need to tear down Ohio State to make Notre Dame look better. I can acknowledge that Ohio State is an outstanding football team. And when they play their best football, they're incredibly hard to beat. The difference is now, I also feel that way about Notre Dame. When they play their best football, they're incredibly hard to beat. Matter of fact, when Notre Dame plays anything close to an A- game, they're hard to even be like within 2 touchdowns against. We've seen them play C+ games and destroy people because they're just that much more talented. And that's the difference. And so when we dive into these things, it's where my confidence comes from. Because like you and I, we talk and text throughout the day when we're watching film. And I'm like, dude, bro, did you see this clip? Did you see that clip? I got a video breakdown on the board of the first quarter against Penn State. You should check it out, everybody, if you remember there. And I looked at several different plays, and I'm like, yeah, Penn State got after Notre Dame in the first quarter, but Notre Dame had like 5 or 6 plays. If they just execute, not execute to this elite ability, but if they just execute, a receiver makes one block, Riley Leonard properly takes a proper angle on speed option and just gets the ball out to Ja'Marr Price. If Emil Wagner just blocks Abdul Carter for a half more second, Notre Dame might be up 14-0 on Penn State. And then when they finally cleaned it up, then they rolled Penn State and outscored them 27-14 in the last 31 minutes of the game. But they were on the verge of doing that in quarter 1 and quarter 2. So that's what we said. Notre Dame didn't complain. We're close to their A game against Penn State and still beat them. So that's the difference, Trev, as we dig into this conversation about the 5 reasons we think Notre Dame's going to win and the 3 concerns. It's about this team is capable of doing this if they just play their game, and this is what playing their game looks like against Penn State. And then the second part will be, this is what not playing your game looks like, and that'll be what gets you beat. So I just wanted to kind of intro that a little bit before we dive into this, because I think it needs to be part of the conversation when you look at matching up this game. If you're being honest and you have any idea of who Notre Dame and Ohio State are, because I promise you I've watched a lot more Ohio State film than a lot of Ohio State people have watched of Notre Dame. And if you have an honest assessment of both teams, I think you're going to look at this game and be like, these are 2 really good football teams. And I could see it going anyway. And we're going to talk about what we think Notre Dame needs to do and what they will do to win this football game.
That's what makes this matchup so great, Brian. I mean, this is what you would expect out of a national championship, right? Because all the things that we had said about Notre Dame is if they play their game and they don't need some, miracle to pull off this and bring home their first national championship since 1988. The same could also be said for Ohio State. Brian and I aren't upset because we believe that, people aren't giving Notre Dame the respect, as in people don't believe that Notre Dame will blow out Ohio State. The narratives about Ohio State of them being an explosive team and they're able to win these types of games and they've looked impressive in the playoffs and they have great coordinators and great skill position. Like, that is all true. They have great defense. But the same is also true for that team in South Bend that nobody's talking about. And that's where a lot of the frustration lies. So that's what makes games like this so fun. This is what you want out of a national championship game. You don't want to watch a game that's just not close. One team is clearly outmatched, because we've seen that sometimes throughout the playoffs. We've seen it in the BCS era. So for all those reasons, it's why I'm excited to dive into it today, Brian. And for all the reasons that you had listed out, the biggest one, not key number one, but the number one thing that you and I both had in common for this was, unlike other seasons, Notre Dame is going into this matchup where there's not a clear advantage across the field for the coordinators. And this has been true of Notre Dame throughout the postseason, right? We've seen it all season long, really, if you want to even take it back to the regular season. But they faced Mike Shanahan at IU, who led a top 10 offense for the Hoosiers this year. They faced Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann at Georgia. And we all know the defensive mind of Kirby Smart, right? They faced Andy Kotelnicki and Allen at Penn State. They faced Lincoln Riley at USC all season long, and they won every single one of those matchups. You know, it's one of those things where in years past, you kind of look at it and it's like, okay, yeah, Jim Knowles holds the advantage over Jared Parker. And I respect Jared Parker, what he did and what he was asked to do, and stepped up and became a first-time offensive coordinator and broke a scoring record in the same year. Like, that's noteworthy, right? But then when you get into big games and you're weighing advantages and you're kind of discussing tail of the tape, the advantage goes to Jim Knowles, right? But now Notre Dame is in a situation where they have Al Golden on defense. They have Mike Denbrock on offense. And yes, this is also Mike Denbrock's first season back in South Bend, but the experience that he has coaching in these kind of games, the experience that he has coaching at Notre Dame in previous stints, makes you feel a lot better than somebody being a first-year offensive coordinator at Notre Dame and also just a first-time offensive coordinator in general, right? So the coordinator matchup is significantly more balanced than what it has been in previous games when Notre Dame has reached this stage. That's reason number one, Brian, for both of us, why we feel confident going into this one.
It is. And I mean, we talk about in 2015, you've got Urban Meyer going against Brian Van Gorder, and Brian Kelly. You're like, come on, bro. This isn't even right. And then look, Mike Denbrock did his best in that game. They battled back, made it 28-21. But you're not going to beat Ohio State when you've got Brian Van Gorder running the show. I mean, it's just, you had good coaches in 2012. You didn't have coaches that were going to go against Saban and Kirby and the guys they had at Alabama in 2012. Not to mention you didn't have the roster to go against that team. 2018 I thought was probably the best coaching staff Notre Dame had on this stage, in my opinion, with Chip Long and Clark Lee. But you look at it now, I mean, you've got two extremely veteran coordinators that have proven it at the highest level. And as you mentioned, we talked about this before the season. How would the coordinator changes impact Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Penn State? It's one of the things that we talked about before the season, Trev. And I don't remember if you were on that show or not, but it was like, look, I said last year that Penn State was the most overrated football team in college football. And I was very down on that team preseason, and they proved me right because every time they played a team with a Ball State, got beat. But I talked about this Penn State team, and I said, I think this Penn State team might be different. They got some guys coming back. I like certain things about them, but I think the offseason hires were really strong. And although I felt they should always have been ranked below Notre Dame, and I feel that is now even more justified by how that game played out on a neutral field, that I thought this was going to be a better Penn State team because I thought Franklin made two great coordinator hires. And I felt the same way about Ohio State, that I Ryan Day giving that offense over to someone like Chip Kelly and now pairing him with Jim Knowles is going to make Ohio State a legitimate force, even though this is not a typical Ohio State roster at certain spots. I mean, Will Howard's had a heck of a year, but he's not C.J. Stroud. He's not Dwayne Haskins. He's not those guys. And this receiving core is really good, but they've had units as good as this one. Like last year, they had one this good. They've had way better offensive lines than the one they have now. They've had better defensive lines than the one they have now. And that's not to knock this defensive line, but it's like, go look at that 2014, 2015 defensive line, and that's more like, yeah, this is a really good secondary. This isn't as good as the 2015 secondary that literally had backups that became first-round picks. But it's a great team. It's not their best roster, but it has become one of their best teams because of coaching. And the reason that I feel confident that Notre Dame can and will win this football game is because I do believe that Notre Dame has the coaching staff to go toe-to-toe with this group. We saw it against Penn State. We saw it against Georgia. They outcoached Georgia. We saw it against Indiana. We saw it all season against other good Jeff Brom. We've seen it all year. And that's, like you said, Trev, that's reason number one. My way I wrote it was the improvement coordinators helped close the gap. And that's reason number one. Because why? I have greater faith that the players will be prepared to play their best and will be put in position to be successful. I feel much better about that now than I ever have when Notre Dame has been on the stage. Forget the talent that's behind it. We'll get to that. But I've never been more confident. The only other time I was this confident that the players would be put in position to be successful was probably 2018 against Clemson with Chip Long and Clark Lee. That's probably the last time I was this confident. But as point number 2 shows out, there was a difference in talent between those two teams.
Absolutely. And look, man, before we move on to the second point, the one little thing that I will add into this, because it's not coordinator specific, but it is coaching. The strides that Marcus Freeman has taken this season have been nothing short of spectacular. You look at the Sugar Bowl, and obviously, if you're doing a tale of the tape here, obviously the advantage goes to Kirby Smart. The dude has 2 national championships, right? Marcus Freeman's playing in his first national championship game. Doesn't have one, right? Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart that game, right? So we're talking about a guy who in years before was running out wrong personnels or not enough people or this season giving too much away in a pre-game interview on the sideline and just saying things that just rub people the wrong way, to now he's out coaching some of the best coaches in the playoffs in the moments where it matters. And I think that is a byproduct, tying it all back in. I think that's a byproduct of having 2 really good coordinators with him, because now he has the confidence to go out and do the things and be aggressive like he wants to, because he knows Mike Denbrock and Al Golden are going to get his players ready and able to perform in those moments when Marcus Freeman demands it, right? So what do those players look like, Brian? And the second point that you had was plain and simple, and it's something that I think that a lot of people in this chat can agree on. They have really good talent spread throughout their team, and they have the ability to beat Ohio State, right? Like what we talked about earlier. They don't need some divine miracle. They have the talent to do so. And in previous teams, Notre Dame had it at some spots, right? In 2015, you had Jalen Smith. In years past, you had a Kyle Hamilton. Before you would have like a Stephon Tuitt and a Manti, but all spread throughout. You couldn't really look at each position group on offense and defense and say this team's loaded.
We talked about this. I've said this a bunch of times in the past. I will take Notre Dame's top 5 from 2012 and stack that up against Alabama's top 5 and feel very good about it. I mean, who are we talking about here? Talking about Manti Te'o, talking about Zach Martin, arguably one of the best guards to ever play the game.
Yeah.
Was a phenomenal player. We're talking about Tyler Eifert, as you mentioned. We're talking about Lewis Nix, Stephon Tuitt. I'm not even going to get into like Cap, but after that top 5, Alabama had 5 to 8 more of those type of guys, and that's where it ended for Notre Dame. After that, it was like really good players, good college players like Chris Watt and Theo Riddick and TJ Jones, but they're not that level of guy. And this one is a little bit different. I don't know that Notre Dame's top 5 are quite as good as Ohio State's top 5. But I think what makes this Notre Dame team so good is that they are so good past 22. And that's what makes this team very different. And Ohio State has very good depth as well. But I think I think this team, simply put, Trevor, they have the talent and ability to win this football game. There's no doubt. I mean, it's just, they don't, like I said before, they don't have to play out of their minds to win this football game. They just got to play their game. Offensive line just has to do what they do, right? We'll get into that. Receivers, you don't got to play. I don't need a receiver to go out and have 9 catches for 150 yards and just, wow, where'd that come from moment. Just do what I've seen you do. Just do things that I've seen you do before. And that's where it gives me a lot of confidence here.
Yeah, we've heard nothing but great things about the depth and talent, the youth and the speed and the athleticism of this football team. And not only has that speculation been put to rest, they've excelled.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you small sample size, but you look at a kid like Leonard Moore. And when Ben Morrison goes down, we've talked about this in previous shows. Like Leonard Moore is filling the boundary position that Ben Morrison played, but he's not stepping then into the shoes of Ben Morrison. That was more the Christian Gray. Like, hey, Christian Gray, we know you were going to be the freaky, athletic, fast complement to Ben Morrison. Now you have to be the guy. And in the biggest moments of the season, he stepped up and shown that he can be the guy. But what you need on the other side of the field is a kid like Leonard Moore. You know what I mean? He's a true freshman, just earned the freshman player of the year honors, right? On defense.
Yeah, from the Football Writers Association of America.
Yeah. And so, like, that's the difference, right? You rattled off all the injuries that Notre Dame has had this season. Like any other season, legitimately, that I can remember, they have half of those. They have half of those injuries. They don't get 14 wins on a season, let alone all postseason win, right? At that stage, right? Like maybe they get a postseason win because they go play in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl, right? But not to this magnitude, right? They're not getting a round one playoff win. They're not winning the Sugar Bowl. They're not winning the Orange Bowl with all these injuries stacked up. And then you had more injuries happen in the Orange Bowl. You know, you lose Riley Mills against IU. And so Notre Dame absolutely has the depth and the talent to compete. They have the depth and the talent to win this football game. And that is something that I haven't been able to say in my lifetime either, because it was a little bit of, you would have it in some areas, but Kyle Hamilton couldn't beat every single spot on the field. Isaiah Foskey couldn't beat every single position on the field. Jalen Smith couldn't beat every single spot on the field. But now you have guys at every single level that can step up and make plays and be game wreckers and things that we're going to talk about later. But no, absolutely. Absolutely. And the next piece of that too is you use postseason performances to back up that narrative, back up the fact that they have the players to go and make game-changing plays. To which my second point was the reason why I feel confident Notre Dame will win this game is because their receivers and corners are coming off of their most complete game as like a duo, right? The pass catchers for Notre Dame against Penn State showed us something that we hadn't seen all year. Fight for the football. Riley Leonard showed us that he's willing to give them chances one-on-one to go up and make contested catches. On Mitchell Evans' sideline catch, he was not open, right? It was Riley Leonard trusting that his guy was going to go up and make a play. On that third down, that back shoulder to Jaden Greathouse, that was just I'm under pressure. I'm putting this on your back shoulder. I trust you to go up and make a play, and he did. And then obviously the game-changing play where the corner got tased and then the, rec league basketball head fake where Jaden Greathouse ran into the end zone and scored to tie the game. Those are plays that we hadn't really seen from Notre Dame receivers in those moments, right? It was always just, well, let's hope Notre Dame can run the ball. I think of 2020 against Bama. I think of 2018 against Clemson. Is if Notre Dame isn't able to run the football, like that's just that's their offense is going to be what it is, unfortunately, right? But now you go and you look at what they did against Penn State. Jaden Greathouse caught 7 catches on 7 targets. Aeneas Williams, a true freshman running back, going back to your point about the depth of talent, true freshman running back, 5 catches, 66 yards on 5 targets. Mitchell Evans was targeted 9 times against Penn State. It's the most targets he's had all season. 5 catches, 58 yards. And so they're coming off of their best performance as a pass-catching unit. And when you compound that with what Notre Dame's corners did, I don't care. And I said this in a show earlier this week. I don't care who you're playing. 0 yards on 0 receptions is crazy. Like, I don't think people put enough – again, we could dive back into the if any other team did this, that's all that they would talk about, which is true. But imagine if Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun didn't allow a single reception to any of the teams that they played in the playoffs at wide receiver. That's all they would talk about. Well, Notre Dame did that against Penn State in the Orange Bowl, in the semifinals of the playoffs. And so that just goes to further the point. Yes, they do have the talent and the skill to do that. And and I see it, I'm seeing it in the chat. I see it all over social media, whatever. It's like the regular season doesn't matter. I'm not saying that they did this in week 7 against Stanford. They did it against Penn State in the semifinals of the playoffs. They have the players to perform and go out and play at this level. And it's evident. You go back and look at box scores if people don't believe me. 0 catches, 0 yards. literally doesn't get better than that. It can't. I mean,
no.
So
the question I have, Trev, when you look at it from the Notre Dame offense standpoint, is what they did repeatable? Like, was it just sort of a one-off against a solid but not great Penn State secondary, or is this who they are? Because I mean, look, when I look at Penn State's pass defense, statistically it was very good, but you and I have talked about this. I never felt it was on the same level as, I mean, even statistically, it wasn't on the same level as what Notre Dame and Ohio State are. I mean, Penn State this year in 16 games gave up 18 touchdown passes. Notre Dame and Ohio State combined only gave up 20. They were very good at interceptions, right? I mean, their quarterback rating was, defensive rating was like 26. Their overall, I mean, they're just not as good as these two teams in pass defense. They're just not. And so can Notre Dame do that against Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun and Jordan Hancock and Caleb Downs and Nathan Ransom and Jermaine Matthews? That's the question. And then against the linebackers, that's the question. And I think they can. I don't know if they will, but I think they can. And that gives me a reason why. And I'm with you on that, is a reason why I think Notre Dame can win this game is because they don't need those guys to play monster games. They don't need Jaden Greathouse to necessarily repeat what he did last week statistically. They just need him to continue to be clutch, and he's been clutch all year. If he does it on 7 targets last time or only on 3 this time, that they're going to be money catches. Maybe this time it's Jordan Faison that steps up and makes plays. Maybe Bo Collins is able to play and he makes plays. Jaden Thomas has probably been their most clutch receiver all year. And so Jaden Harrison's had his moment. So, that's the thing for me is they don't need any of those guys to play out of their minds, or the whole group. Everybody's got to play the best game that they've ever played to win this. That's not where it's at. That's why there's confidence in it. Number 3, Trev, as you dive into these things, is why I think Notre Dame can win this football game. Notre Dame will win this football game because I think Notre Dame can run on Ohio State. I think that's and not even necessarily man, boy, if everything goes right, I think they can run for $125. I mean, I think if Notre Dame plays well up front and blocks well on the perimeter, they're going to go big. I mean, look, we saw it last week. Now pass game wise, I think Ohio State's a much better defense than what they were last year, right? And I mean, excuse me, then Ohio State's much better in the pass defense than what Penn State is. We've talked about that. The numbers back that up.
Yeah.
Run game wise, they're very similar. Very similar. Ohio State gives up 2.7 yards a play. Penn State's 3.1. Ohio State's given up 12 rushing touchdowns. Penn State gave up 10. Ohio State gave up 90 rushing yards a game. Penn State gave up 102. I mean, they're very similar in that regard. And you look at, Notre Dame only ran for $117 against Ohio State or Penn State. I'm like, yeah, they didn't. But a couple things to think about is, number one, Notre Dame ran for 101 yards in the second half of that game. And then, as I pointed out in my video breakdown at Irish Breakdown on the message board, the premium board, there were 2 plays that if Bo Collins simply makes a good down, not even great, just get an outside shoulder on that guy, Aeneas Williams might house one. And if Riley Leonard takes a proper pitch angle on another speed option early in the game, Jerian Price probably scores on a 50-something yard touchdown. There were opportunities there. You didn't execute and capitalize. When you figured it out, Penn State couldn't stop you. And Notre Dame did that 101 yards without any long runs, which is normally what they get. They were just gashing Penn State in the second half. Just creasing them 6 yards, 8 yards, 9 yards. I mean, that's what they were doing in the second half. Penn State gets a -4 on Jadari, and next play he runs for 13 to make it 3rd and 1. They were just gashing them. And I think that's where it gives me another reason why Notre Dame can win his football games. I think they can run on Ohio State. And Ohio State has a great run defense. It's not that it's not that at all. It's just I think when I break down the film, I think it's a really good defensive line, but I think you can move it. We saw it last year. As I said, I don't talk a lot about last year's game because they're different teams, but this is still primarily the same defensive line that they had last year. Now, Notre Dame's offensive line is not the same, but the interior is pretty similar as it was last year. You were Zeke Correll, Pat Coogan, and Rocco Spindler inside last year. This year, you're Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, and Billy Schrouth. And now at tackle, we'll see. Or it could be Charles Jagasaw at guard and Tosh at tackle. It could be Jagasaw at tackle and Rocco at guard. But if you're going to run the football, a healthy Rocco Spindler at guard and Charles Jagasaw at left tackle, I think gives you a chance to run the football in this game. And if Rocco's not good and Charles Jagasaw replaces him, then you've got Tosh Baker at left tackle. I think he can handle himself enough to where he's not a liability in the run game and you can get a push in other areas. So I think that it's one of those things where I look at it, it's Trev, and I said, I think they're capable of running the football with their running backs and their quarterback. And if they can get that part of their game going, which I think they can, and I think your reasoning for why you think they can make sense, which I know you'll get to in a second, I think that makes this Notre Dame team hard to beat. When they're running the football, they're hard to beat.
Well, another factor, too, is Notre Dame has shown all year. Now, disclaimer, they haven't faced as near of a quality of run defense as Ohio State's, but Penn State and Ohio State, to your point, is very, very similar. But you go back through and you look at who they faced this season. Texas A&M had a relatively decent rush defense. Louisville, heading into their game, had the 18th ranked rush defense in yards per game, the 11th in yards per rush. You go through and you look at Army, again, for people that are going to take this and run with it. I'm not saying that Army's rush defense and Ohio State's rush defense are the same. I understand that their opponents are different. However, heading into that game, Army had the number 3 rush defense in college football. They had the number 15 rush defense in yards per rush. IU had the number 1 rush defense when Notre Dame played them. Ran for over $190. Penn State had a good rush defense. They rushed for over 100 yards and a half once they got some things figured out and they had a healthy O-line, right? You go through and you look at Georgia had a good rush defense. Like numbers-wise, it wasn't as spectacular. They had given up, we talked during that game week about what they allowed to UMass and what they allowed to some other teams. But it was still a good quality rush defense, and I think that they showed that, especially on the biggest stage, But the catalyst was Riley Leonard, right, which I know we're going to talk about later. But it's not like Notre Dame has played a bunch of cupcake run defenses, and now this is the only quality rush defense that they faced on game 16 of the season, right? They've faced a lot of good run defenses. They've also faced a lot of good defensive linemen, which is what my next point is, why I believe that Notre Dame is also going to have success in this football game and why I believe that they're going to win this football game. I went through and I made a list of all the defensive lines and the various linemen that Notre Dame have faced, their offensive line has faced this season. And the list is long, like very, very long. Texas A&M had a great rush defense or good D-line. Louisville had a good D-line. Georgia Tech, IU, Georgia, Penn State. I mean, the list goes on and on for players. I mean, they faced Nick Scourton, Ashton Gelati, Zeke Biggers, Mikkel Kamara, CJ West, Nazir Stackhouse, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant. They faced all of these guys. And I have a lot of respect for JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. I do. But you're not going to convince me that those 4 guys are just miles above any of those guys that I had just listed. And Notre Dame has faced all of them, not over the course of Freeman's tenure, not over in just this season. That's who they went up against. So we talk all the time about teams being battle tested. I took a little bit more granular approach, and the offensive line is extremely, extremely battle tested. They faced quality defensive lines, not even quality. They faced really good defensive lines. Penn State was a really good defensive line. IU was a really good defensive line. Georgia, for all their talent, Jalen Walker, Michael Williams, Nazir Stackhouse. Those are going to be names that you're going to be hearing on Sundays. And Notre Dame has faced all of them, right? That's not me saying that, well, since they faced all of them, good luck, JT, good luck, Jack Sawyer. Like they will make their plays. It's a great game.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I don't think there are at least 2 players that they faced this year that I think are better than anybody that Ohio State has individually. And I'm thinking of Scourton and Abdul Carter. I do think this is the best defensive line that they have played as a unit all year.
Yeah.
But it's about matchups, right? And the teams that have really given Notre Dame problems running the ball for 60 minutes are teams that are really big and physical up the middle. And Ohio State is big and physical, but not to the degree that some of the teams that have given them problems are. Tyleek can be at times, and if he's on his game, he's a horse. But when I break down Ohio State's film, the things that Notre Dame does, they have at times been vulnerable to early in games. And the reason the numbers look the way they look is because Ohio State will just jump all over a team, and then that team has to go away from being able to run the football on them. And that's where I think if Notre Dame's able to get their run game going, then they can keep this a game, keep the Ohio State offense off the field, wear Ohio State's defensive line down, just like last year. And then in the fourth quarter is when you start gashing them. And I have a feeling we aren't going to see Mike Denbrock make the same kind of late game mistakes that we saw last year. And again, I like Jared Parker. Everybody knows that. I mean, they didn't score 39 points a game last year in spite of Jared Parker, right? He did a really good job. I think Mike Denbrock has way more experience in games like this. This won't even be his first major game in a postseason game against Ohio State. He had to go against a really good Ohio State team in 2015 when he was the OC for Notre Dame. And so, like, that's the reason why. And I think number 4, Trev, is let's flip it to the other side of the ball for me. And my number 4 is I think that they're going to win this game because they're going to get after Will Howard. And when Notre Dame gets after the quarterback, they tend to really get after the run game. Those two things go hand in hand because their stunts are meant to be kind of dual purpose. They don't just get after the quarterback on third down. They get after the quarterback on first and second down because the stunts they use that are designed to get to the quarterback if he drops back are also meant to be disruptive against the run game. So if Notre Dame is going to win this game, it's because they get after Will Howard and because they are able to slow down the run game. If Will Howard is able to, look, I've been sitting there having this debate in the chat about, well, you can't play man defense against Jeremiah Smith or he'll go for over 100. Maybe he will. But, like, are we forgetting that Notre Dame has played against the same group of receivers the last 2 years with Marvin Harrison? And he didn't even get to 100 in 2 games combined. And yet Jeremiah Smith is this like Greek god that Notre Dame has never faced before. Jeremiah Smith is a phenomenal talent. And if you were to ask me, okay, Notre Dame, they're doing an open receiver draft for 2025. And you could take any receiver in college football and have them on your football team. Like, before you even finish the question, I've written Jeremiah Smith's name down on a piece of paper and I'm running it up to the commissioner and I'm drafting him. He's a phenomenal player. I think he's more physically gifted than Marvin Harrison. I think Marvin was more polished. The comment is more about twofold. Is number one is, like, I think you're being disrespectful to Notre Dame's corners, just like you were last year and just like you were the year before, Ohio State fans, because you said the same stuff about Marvin last year. We're not going to be able to cover him this way. You're not going to be able to cover him this year like you did last year. Because last year, we thought Jackson was going to be our guy. And he got hurt, and Marvin was just a sophomore. But this year now he's a junior. And, man, this year he's playing at a high level. And he's a better player than he was last year. And there's no way you're going to be able to play man coverage against him and shut him down. That's what we heard last year. In the game before he played Notre Dame, he had 5 catches for 126 yards. The game after Notre Dame, he had 8 for 163. Game after that, 6 for 105. Game after that, 11 for 162. Game after that, 6 for 123. And on and on and on. Yet against Notre Dame, he had 3 for 32. Why? Is it simply because Notre Dame's corners are just phenomenal? It's partly why. Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart were outstanding. But another reason why is Kyle McCord never could get comfortable in that game. He couldn't go through his progressions to get Marvin Harrison to football. That's the whole point. If Notre Dame's corners have to cover for 3.5 to 4 seconds on a vast majority of dropbacks, Emeka will be hard to stop. Jeremiah will be hard to stop, and Carnell Tate will be hard to stop. Because I don't care who you are at corner, when you play against top guys, you're going to have a hard time covering them for that long. If a quarterback is confident and comfortable, I don't care how good your coverage is on a go ball, Will Howard's going to drop a couple over the outside shoulder that you can't defend if he's comfortable and in the pocket. Notre Dame made Kyle McCord very uncomfortable last year. That's going to be the key in this game as well. It's not Leonard Moore's going to lock down Jeremiah Smith. It's Leonard Moore and Christian Gray are both going to go against Jeremiah Smith, as will Jordan Clark and the safeties, because Ohio State's going to move him all around. But they're going to do enough against him to where by the time he does get open, Will Howard's checking it down, throwing it away, scrambling, or getting sacked. Or he's getting hit and he's throwing an errant pass. There was a play last year where Marvin Harrison actually had Benjamin Morrison beat. But they got to Kyle McCord, and he threw the ball just a little too far outside, and Benjamin was able to knock him out of bounds. Even though he caught the ball on the go route, they were knocking him out of bounds because he couldn't throw an accurate pass because there was pressure. That's the key. It's not lock down Jeremiah Smith. Nobody's locking down Jeremiah Smith for 60 minutes. It's pressure Will Howard, shut down the run game, put them in more obvious passing situations. That's how you keep this pass game in check. That's how anybody keeps this pass game in check. It's getting after the quarterback. And Notre Dame has shown in a lot of these types of games that they can get after the quarterback. And I think Ohio State's going through a similar situation that Notre Dame's going through, a little bit of a patchwork offensive line. I think the right side of that offensive line can be exposed, and I think the interior of the offensive line can get beat. And if the defensive line can get after the quarterback, the linebacker pressures hit home, that's how you shut down the pass game. And that's the reason that I think Notre Dame can win.
Well, and Ohio State has shown, Will Howard has shown this year that when he is pressured, he is a significantly less efficient quarterback. The numbers back that up. You can go back and look at what he did against, at times against Indiana and what he looked like against Michigan. I mean, look at the difference between the Oregon and Tennessee game and the Texas game. What was the resounding difference? He was pressured more, right? Texas sacked Will Howard for the first time in the postseason. It's no mystery that happened. Right. And they ended up putting up 21 offensive points. Like, there's a correlation here, right? When you break things down analytically, you start looking at trends, right? Now, one of the things that there are probably some stats that tie into this, but my fourth reason, Brian, and it kind of falls in line to your point of being able to pressure Will Howard. I think Notre Dame's a more physical football team. And I don't believe that to be a knock on Ohio State. They are who they are. Notre Dame is who they are. But what Notre Dame has shown in the postseason is, especially when they need to, they out-physical teams. Just go look at what Notre Dame's defense did to Georgia's offense. They were just the more physical side of the football. That fumble that Adon Schuler caused, that wasn't because of a bad handoff. That wasn't because of some fluky play. Adon Schuler lit him up, hit him so hard the ball flew forward. Didn't just drop straight down. In the second half, you want a microcosm of what Notre Dame's season has been? They weren't the more physical team in the first half. They woke up and then absolutely became the more physical team in the second half, right? On offense and defense. Physical teams have given Ohio State issues this year. They have, right? You go back through and look at how they played at times against Michigan and at times against Penn State and at times against Michigan State and at times against Nebraska. I mean, really, you can make the argument against Nebraska the entire game. Nebraska outscored Ohio State in the second half 11-8. And so that to me is what is in favor of Notre Dame. Yes, both teams can be physical. Ohio State has shown that they can be physical at times, but I don't believe that to be their identity. To me, watching them play, it's a very picky and choosy when it's time. Now we're going to lay the wood today, guys. And identity is something that you are all the time. And that's Notre Dame. Like, Notre Dame is the more physical football team. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't believe that to be a knock against Ohio State. Like, I would put Notre Dame's physicality as a football team up against anybody else in the country. Texas was a very physical defense. Right. Ohio State struggled. Like, you're not going to tell me that they didn't. They went from 42 points to 41 points to 21 offensive points. Mm-hmm. Why? They faced a very physical defense. So that to me is that's my fourth point, is Notre Dame is the more physical team.
When they're on their game, that's 100% true. And that's why we keep saying it's about playing your game. This Notre Dame team has to dictate the tempo and the tenor of the game. Ohio State's going to want to try to turn it into a track meet. Not so much with tempo, but with how they attack you. Left, right, vertical, downfield, that type of stuff. You have to make it about who's going to punch the hardest, who's going to take the punches, right? I when I think of this game, Trev, I think of that speech that Rocky gave his son in Rocky Balboa, which saved the franchise, by the way, because Rocky 5 was so bad it almost ruined the franchise. But I thought the Rocky Balboa was just abysmal. Rocky Balboa saved that franchise. But that's, it's not about how hard, it's not about, getting hit, or I'm trying to remember what it was, but it's not about how hard you get hit. It's about, basically get knocked down and get up. I have to go listen to the speech. It was a great speech. That's how winning's done. And for Notre Dame, that's how winning is done. You punch look, because this Ohio State team's a little different than last year's team. I think this Ohio State team will punch back. But then you got to punch them again, and then you got to take that punch, and you got to punch them again. And eventually they're going to be like, all right, it's yours. Like, I don't think this Ohio State team, because to me, what makes this Ohio State team different from past ones, it's about they are a more physical team on defense than they've been in years. And Jim Knowles has been building to that. I mean, that's what he's been working towards. He inherited a pretty soft team. He's been working towards that. It's more about they're just not, their style of play is not about that level of violent type of play. So it's not about them being a soft team. They don't like physicality. It's not that. They didn't lose to Michigan because they got punched in the mouth and turned into a bunch of cowards. That's not what happened. It's Michigan got them into a street fight. And that's not how Ohio State wants to play. Like Ohio State is they're like a travel basketball team, right? If you want to use a rec league basketball team, they're that travel basketball team with all those great athletes, and they go into these different tournaments, and there's structure, and there's this, and there's free flowing, and they call fouls, and that's why they want to play. Notre Dame is like, no. We're going to Rucker Park. We're going to play in the streets. We're going to play street ball, and it's a fight. Foul. I ain't see no foul. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they want to play, that brutal. We're going to fight you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. That's who Notre Dame is. And sometimes you get a team like Ohio State into that mix. They'll fight you, they'll battle, but they're just not built for that. And Ohio State's going to try to get Notre Dame out of that. Notre Dame's going to try to get them into that. So it's about which team can impose their will in regard to how they want to play the game, right? And so none of that is an insult about Ohio State, because I think Ohio State will fight. If you want to use a boxing match, right? There's rules in boxing. There's things you can and can't do. When I grew up watching boxing, especially like the non-heavyweights, man, it was like an art form. I still remember watching Sweet Pea Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. I'm like, this is skill right here. This is incredible skill. And then there's a street fight, and there are no rules, and it's just a battle. And you can try and come at me with all this boxing stuff, but I'm leg whipping you and I'm taking you down. You know what I mean? And that's Notre Dame. And so whatever analysis you want to use, that's how you have to use. So it's not that Ohio State is soft and all these other things that some people accuse them of. That was true of this team a couple years ago. It's not true of them now. That's not their style. And that's what hurt them against Michigan, is they tried to prove a point by playing Michigan's game. You're like, no, that's how Michigan's built. You got to play your game. Can Notre Dame get them into that street fight again? Can Notre Dame get them into that? It's about punching back and taking punches and doing all that. If it becomes about that, then I think Notre Dame wins this football game. If it becomes about who has the fastest players, well, now it's going to be a little bit tougher for Notre Dame to win, because you've taken out what was got you here. Not that Notre Dame doesn't have speed, but that's just not how they're built. They're built to play not smash mouth football like they're ground and pound, but they get big plays because they come off the line, they play hard, they punch in the mouth, and then you let them elite backs do work. That's it to me. And so if they can make this game about that, then they make this game about that. The fifth one, Trev. Fifth reason why Notre Dame's going to win. It's very simple, man. It's Riley Leonard.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up street ball, and you talked about going out and playing at the park, not in an AAU tournament.
I'm drafting Riley Leonard in the first round if we're doing that, bro.
That's Riley Leonard. Hey, especially after you go and watch those high school basketball highlights, man. He was throwing it down. But that's Riley Leonard. And to me, he's the catalyst in this game, like he was against IU, like he was against Georgia, like he was against Penn State. And I'm going to sound like a broken record saying it, but this is why you brought this kid to South Bend. Because Riley Leonard, he's one of those kids. You saw it on full display against Georgia. He just finds ways to win. He does. Against Penn State, he had two crucial turnovers, and he responded both times. Goes out of the game evaluated for a concussion, significantly longer than what Tyler Warren was evaluated for, I might add. And he came back in and led a scoring drive on the next time he touched the field. Riley Leonard
pretty much ripped Penn State up after that outside of one pass.
Literally. And so Riley Leonard is the difference maker in this one. And yes, just as much for the on-field matchups, right? Ohio State hasn't really faced a lot of mobile quarterbacks this year. They faced some. They did well against Aiden Chillis against Michigan State. Once you factor in like sacks, I think he ended the day with like -6 rushing yards.
Yeah, he had a couple early scrambles and
yeah.
But he's not a runner; he's a scrambler.
Right.
That is a little bit different.
Same thing with Drew Aller. They're not running designed run plays for him, at least not that many. He's a scrambler. He can move the change if he has to. Honestly, same thing with Dylan Gabriel. I think a lot of people painted the picture that he was a true dual threat quarterback, and he's just not. They're not calling a whole lot of design run plays for him outside of maybe like a zone read on the goal line, but they're not running QB power with Dylan Gabriel on 3rd and 1 when they need to move the chains.
Right.
But Riley Leonard has proven that he can be that guy. He is, for all the talk around Notre Dame hasn't faced a receiving core like Ohio State, which is true. For all the talk about that, Ohio State hasn't faced a quarterback like Riley Leonard.
Right.
15 other teams have made the same mistake of underestimating his speed and underestimating his size. And
you even got some Notre Dame fans in the chat doing that.
Yeah.
I hope Ohio State's front seven's not as fast as Ohio State's, because I don't remember Riley Leonard running away from them. I remember Riley Leonard running up the middle and gashing Penn State in the second half. 3rd down runs, touchdown run, moving the chains on that final drive to get them in field goal range. Who got the ball? Who was gashing them up? It was Riley Leonard. Who was the guy that was able to get out of the pocket, get outside, scramble sometimes, throw the ball away, and other times in situations where against every other quarterback Penn State plays this year, it's a sack.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, they better be as fast. Otherwise, he's going to do to them what he did to Georgia.
Yeah.
But the point isn't about running away from them. It's about making plays.
Yeah.
And he made a lot of plays because of athleticism and speed.
Well, and to your point, Notre Dame has a quarterback under center that's not afraid to go at anybody. That's the difference, in my opinion. Like, it's for Riley Leonard for most of the season, it has been a faceless opponent. I mean, most of the it's crazy to look back and think of, but most of the adversity that Riley Leonard faced this season was internally at the Notre Dame fan base, calling for his head, and they wanted him benched. And and at some points in the season, I get it. Like, I'm not here to argue that point. But who jump-started the offense against Georgia? It was Riley Leonard. It's ripping off chunk runs, not just moving the chains on 3rd and 1 and getting 3 yards. I mean, on 1st and 10, they're calling QB counter with him, and he's ripping off 30-yard runs. Riley Leonard sparked the offense, right? That's the difference for me. So he's the difference maker. Brian, I know you're in the same boat as me with Riley Leonard.
I do think he's got to make plays with his arm in this game, though. Like, you're not going to beat – look, I've said it before. We said it before the Penn State game. You're not going to beat Penn State with Riley Leonard throwing for 90 yards because Penn State's not Georgia. Because Penn State has a better offense than Georgia. Penn State can get to 24 points. Guess what? If Georgia would have scored 24 points, they might have won. Now, I think Notre Dame would have scored again because Notre Dame wouldn't have just kind of gone into run the clock out mode. But you get the point that I'm making. You're not going to be able to do that against Ohio State because Ohio State has a better offense than Georgia. And I've said this before the game too. I don't care if it was Carson Beck or Jaden Rashada. It didn't matter who played quarterback. Georgia was not going to move the ball on Notre Dame. This is not that team. This is a much different team. Georgia's offense was not built to have success against Notre Dame. It wasn't. And Ohio State's offense, to me, is more capable of making you have to get into the 20s, maybe even 30s, which means you're not going to win that game scoring 16 offensive points. And so you're not going to be able to throw for 90 yards and beat Ohio State. He's going to have to make some plays. He's going to have to make some plays with his arm as well if they're going to win this game. But look, end of the day, Trev, this is why you brought Riley Leonard here. This is why you brought him here. This to make these type of plays and to win these type of games. That's what you brought him here for.
And right now in these games, he's 3-0 for the reasons why you brought him to South Bend. And for all the reasons that we just listed out, there's a good chance that we believe that Riley Leonard is and the rest of the team is going to make it 4-0 in these kind of games. But there are some areas of concern, Brian, when it comes to this matchup. But go ahead.
Oh, no, I thought you were going to already go to it.
Oh, no.
You're good. So that's why I was like, shut up, Brian. Trev knows what he's doing. He's got it.
No worries, man. No worries. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, guys. There's 567 people, awesome fans, awesome football fans, awesome Notre Dame fans listening in our chat right now. So be sure to hit that like button.
There's some pretty awesome Buckeye fans in here, too.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm disagreeing with some of them. Like there's a guy, Sun City, I've never seen before. We're disagreeing on some stuff. Been super respectful. Appreciate you being in here. Archer, of course, is always in here. So there's been some Buckeye fans in here having good conversation. You don't have to agree with us. You don't have to think Notre Dame's going to win or Notre Dame's a phenomenal team. Be respectful, and you guys are doing an awesome job of that. We appreciate you. A couple Ohio State fans wanted to come in here and act like clowns. We got rid of them. But I got to say this. Look, I give Ohio State's fan base a ton of crap, and we get some of those ridiculous comments on our YouTube channel. And I know there's some Notre Dame fans do the same thing. But this has been the best a group of Ohio State fans to come into in the last 3 years. They've played them twice now before. A lot of Notre Dame fans coming in here and having good conversation, and we appreciate that and give you respect for that. So we appreciate that very much, guys.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, you're listening to a show with two guys that just love to talk ball, and it's always appreciated when we can see that going down in the chat as well. But in order to make sure that you guys stay up with what we're doing here, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, whatever platform that you watch us on, whether it be Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. And of course, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.